Open the podcast bay doors, Hal.
Hello everyone, and welcome to episode 147 of Welcome to Geektown. I'm your host, Kurt Onstead. I've been a proud geek all my life, being into role-playing games, board games, sci-fi, fantasy, and especially superheroes and comics. And I want to help others join me in those pursuits, but I found that sometimes people can get overwhelmed or feel left out because they don't already have what some consider the requisite knowledge to be considered a fan. And that's where Welcome to Geektown comes in. Here you can ask your questions without feeling like a gatekeeper is calling you out for not yet being fully versed in every aspect of your new interest. This is the last episode of March, not counting the re-release of episode 7 next week with improved audio quality. So it's time to shout out my patrons for the month. That list is currently Mike Sterling, Justin Bailey, Lily Breen, Jesse Clark, Ricky Garvin, Rob Garrison, Aaron Woodward, Aaron Borst, Carla Hoffman, Lyndon Onstead, Julio Herrera, and Matthew Saint. Thank you all for your support. And if you want to join in with helping the show out, it's just $1 per month, and that gets you this monthly shout-out, as well as audio outtakes and full scripts of every written show. This week, we conclude my interview with J.M. DeMatteis. While we will talk about JM's time co-writing the Justice League in this episode, we spend much of it talking about his creator-owned work, starting with one of the few titles published under Marvel's Epic imprint, the fantasy title called Moonshadow. And so you have done some work outside of a shared universe. In fact, you did some of the rare Marvel published work that is creator-owned comics through their Epic imprint.
That's right.
For people who are unfamiliar, can you tell listeners a little bit about Moonshadow?
Sure. Moonshadow was one of the first, if not the first, creator-owned thing I ever did. Again, it was the 80s. It was a time of incredible creativity and expansion. And, at DC, they did Camelot 3000, and I think Ronin had come out maybe around the same time, new formats, and launched this Epic line, where it was all, creators can go and do original stuff, get paid a decent rate, and hold on to your rights, which was an amazing thing. That landscape has changed a lot since then. But Epic was a great thing, run by Archie Goodwin. Had great people like Laurie Sutton and Dan Chichester and Margaret Clark working there as editors, really good people. And I guess, my Marvel contract that we had talked about before was running out.
Yeah.
DC invited me to come back. And so I was very, very tempted because they offered me Justice League, one of my favorite books.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in just a second.
They offered me Swamp Thing, another favorite book. Marty Pasco had been writing Swamp Thing and he was leaving the book. And I forgot what else. And then I had this idea, Moonshadow, that I've been playing with in my head for years. And I pitched it to Karen Berger. And we were going to do it there. She really wanted to do it. And in fact, I remember her saying to me, she doesn't even remember, said, there's this new artist named Dave Gibbons. I would love for him to draw this. So I always say somewhere in a parallel universe, there's a version of Moonshadow edited by Karen and drawn by Dave Gibbons. At the same time, I was having a good time at Marvel. So I went to Shooter and we talked about renewing my contract. I said, and there were two things I wanted to do. I had done this story for Bizarre Adventures called Greenberg the Vampire. Another, in those days, it wasn't creator owned in the sense that I didn't have the rights, but it was my own creation. I said, I really, really want to do a Greenberg graphic novel. And the other thing I want to do is this idea, Moonshadow. And he read it and he said, let's give it to Archie. And that sounds like it's an epic comic. So he agreed to do that. And so I stayed at Marvel and we did Moonshadow, which was 12 issues. And it allowed me, first of all, through my friend Dan Green, I met John J. Muth, one of the most extraordinary artists to ever work in or out of comics. He's now had a 20-year career as an incredibly successful children's book writer and illustrator, very successful. There's got a TV series on Apple TV, the name of which escapes me at the moment, based on his books. Anyway, so I met John. We hit it off. The same kind of thing, that creative combustion was just there. And so, I'd been working at Marvel and DC, working within these universes. And what I didn't realize consciously, but I had kind of erected these walls and said, well, this is how you do a comic book. You do it this way. And you have to do it a certain way, and certain things have to fit, But in stepping out of that and just doing my own thing, all those walls went away. And I wrote Moonshadow the same way I would be writing a novel, with complete freedom. And Archie and the folks at Epic gave us pretty much complete freedom to do it our own way. And so it completely liberated me as a writer. I couldn't have done Kraven's Last Hunt the way I did it had I not done Moonshadow first. It was really, really a huge turning point for me as a writer. It was a great, great experience. And then some years later, we took Moonshadow over to DC. Vertigo reprinted it, and Muth and I did a sequel called Farewell Moonshadow, another piece of work that I'm really, really proud of. And they collected the whole thing together. And now Dark Horse has it. They put out a beautiful hardcover edition a couple of years ago. We're going to have some really amazing new editions coming from Dark Horse probably next year.
Oh, great.
So it's another series that has lived a nice, long, healthy life. But for me personally, it's very, very meaningful because it really helped me and changed me as a writer. It allowed me to really find my voice as a writer.
Oh, that's great. And they say it was the first painted American comic. I
believe it was. Yeah, Muth painted the whole thing. And, tough thing to paint a 30-page comic book for, every issue. So we had a couple issues along the way. We had help. Kent Williams, the great Kent Williams, stepped in and did an issue, and other people helped along. But Jay did 99% of the work, and just extraordinary. And again, an extraordinary collaboration. And working on Farewell Moonshadow took it to a whole other level for us creatively as well. And we're still good friends. We stay in touch regularly. He's a great guy, and seriously, one of the single most creative human beings I have ever, and most talented human beings I have ever known. And that's the great thing in a collaboration. It's like, oh, this guy's really good. I have to up my game. I bring it up to here and go, oh, and I'm going to challenge him now to do things that we each challenged each other, and we each grew as creative beings through working on that book. It was just a great collaboration. Same thing with Kent Williams. We did Blood a Tale for Epic after that. And that was an interesting collaboration. We're going to have a new edition of Blood coming out probably toward the end of the year this year. Big oversized hardcover. And
which company is that through?
I won't, until it's formally announced, I don't want to get into it. But it will be announced probably sometime in the next few months. And Kent literally lived next door to me when we were working on that book.
Oh, wow.
We were in the same apartment complex. Well, no. Well, Kent and I were friends. He lived there. I was looking for a new place to live, and I liked where he lived, so I got this apartment. And it turned out, I'd walk out the door to the next little complex, and in about 60 seconds, I could be in Kent's apartment. So when we were working on Blood, we were literally just running back and forth to each other's apartment. It was an incredible, very, very close collaboration, and another liberating series to work on.
Okay, so let's switch back over to DC.
Okay.
Where you collaborated with Keith Giffen on the Justice League International, Justice League Europe era. How did the two of you end up co-writing that book?
That was through Andy Helfer, who was the editor of that book. One of the best editors to ever sit behind a desk at DC, and one of the nicest guys also. I keep singing the praises of these guys, but it's true, Yep. I'm not talking about the guys who I don't like, and there aren't really many of them anyway. But it turned out Andy and I we didn't find out until we met each other at DC. We grew up across the street from each other and didn't know it. And then we met at DC years later, and I was like, I lived across the street at that building over there. And it was an amazing thing. So we kind of became instant buddies. I met him when he was still like an intern at DC, and we became friends. And he was editing Justice League, and they had hatched this plan. Keith really wanted to write that book. And then Keith decided he just wasn't ready to do all the writing. He was happy to plot it. He wasn't comfortable writing it. And I looked at what Keith had done with the first issue, and I said, he's great. He can do whatever he wants. You don't need me. And that was my dance for the first 6 months. You don't need me, but we want you. But you don't need me, and I'm going to quit the book. No, we need, it was that kind of thing. And then finally I realized I'm having so much fun on this book this is like a great gig. It's like effortless. It's joyful. And then the next thing I knew, it was 5 years later, and we'd done Justice League and Justice League Europe and Justice League Quarterly. And I'd done all these miniseries and spin-offs. And it was, so for 5 years, I'd say, 80% of what I was doing in comics was probably Justice League related in some way.
Yeah.
A great collaboration with Keith. Now, in those early days, people, you're co-writers, so you must be in the same room, like a team of movie writers working. No, it didn't work that way at all. Keith was off in New Jersey doing his plots. They'd sent, he'd work out the plot with Andy. He would draw like little mini comics. That's the way he plotted the book, and he did breakdowns to guide the artists.
Yeah.
And then FedEx man would show up with the plot, and 90% of the time I didn't know what the hell was going to happen in the story until the plot arrived in the mail. If I had any questions, I'd call Andy, what's happening? What? And then I say this only half jokingly, but it's kind of the way the book went. It was very spontaneous. It was like, write the first thing that comes into your head, because it was the tone of the book. It was the playfulness of the book, and I would just get those characters talking. And the great thing about Keith is, you learn that through the dialogue phase of a book, you can tilt a story in any number of directions. You can introduce entire new plot lines. You can change the characters. You can do so much through that final script, through that dialogue. Now, someone else would say, no, I want you to shoot exactly to my plots. How dare you change anything? But that wasn't Keith. Keith had no creative ego about it. So Keith was always happy that I took his plot and I played with it. And then I'd watch him take things. I'm taking what he did and playing with that. He's taking what I've done and he's spinning that, and then I'd spin it back. So it became, we always say it was like a game of tennis, back and forth and back and forth,
Yeah.
And of course, in the first year and a half, 2 years, whatever it was, we had Kevin McGuire. You couldn't have asked for a better artist for that tone of that book. And so again, I give all the credit really to Andy for even thinking to put these three disparate factors together, and somehow it all gelled, and it was this you can't make magical things happen. You can't make chemistry happen. I've often said I've had projects where I've written a great script, I think, and the artist has done a great job, but there's some chemical connection that's missing. Mm-hmm. And it just doesn't happen. And then you have something like, like say Sal or Mike Zack and John J. Muth, or what happened with Keith and Kevin and Andy on Justice League. It was just, we couldn't have predicted it. Keith says that he thought for sure we were going to get canceled within the first 3 months. He never thought the book. And then the book, same thing, what I said before, it becomes between the audience and the book, and the audience just took to that book.
Oh, absolutely.
And I always say we were so dense and dim that, because to us, it was like, all right, this is a great gig, but it's just another gig. You're a freelancer. You're always looking for the next gig. 5 years go by, it's over, it's done, it's forgotten. 10 years later, we came back together for formerly known as the Justice League. And that's when we finally went, oh, we're pretty good together. It took us all that. That's really, truly, it was like, oh, there's something really special happening here. And then Keith and I have gone on to do so many other things together. And occasionally with Kevin as well, we did Defenders at Marvel. We did Metal Men at DC. We did, and Keith and I, kept working through Scooby Apocalypse just a few years ago at DC, So it's an interesting thing. We get thrown together. And Keith and I always joke that, hopefully many years from now on our graves, it's going to say blah, ha, ha, or something on there, because that's what people know. They know Craven. They know these are the things that sort of jump out.
Yeah.
And Keith and I are bound together, and with Kevin as well forever, just because people love that book. I couldn't have predicted it. And I've been all around the world to conventions all over the world. Same thing with Craven and some of these other projects. And when you go to another country and people are like, oh, I've been reading this book all my life and it means so much to me. It's an amazing thing. It's so profoundly gratifying. And like Justice League has had a life of its own. And it's still out there. And same thing with Craven. People are discovering it for the first time now.
Yeah, it's great that they've really expanded it. When you were first writing comics, as you said, there was no reprint, there were no trade paperbacks. And, when I first started getting into comics as a reader, there weren't really much in the way of trade paperbacks. There was like Watchmen and a couple of
when Craven came out, they did a hardcover collection, and that was a huge deal. That was a really big deal, because it wasn't like now where it doesn't matter. You sneeze and 6 months later they'll collect it, They collect anything now, But then it was a big deal to see something collected like that.
Yeah. Now, you worked with a slew of superstar artists on the JLI and JLE. Kevin Maguire, of course, as you mentioned, Adam Hughes, Bart
Yeah, Bart
Sears.
Sears.
You even, my personal favorite comic book artist, Derek Robertson. You had some of his first.
I think his first work was might have been in a Justice League Quarterly story that I wrote. Yeah.
Yeah. When you've been working on a title as long as you did on JLI and JLE, did you have any say on the artists that you worked with, or was that
No, because it was pretty much a machine.
Mhm.
It was like, we got to get, and especially when we were doing so much, Justice League Europe, Justice League Quarterly, and I'm writing Mr. Miracle or Martian Manhunter or Dr. Fate, all these things that sort of tied in. When you're on a monthly book, it's not the same as like when you're in a creator-owned thing. Obviously, you're looking for the right artist and you're working together in a certain intimate way. On a monthly book, it's, sometimes it's the warm body that you need to do that. We were very lucky that we had the people that you mentioned. And Adam Hughes basically came at, I'd never heard of Adam Hughes, and suddenly here's this incredible artwork every month,
Yeah.
Steve Lealoa did a lot of stuff. Mike McCone did a bunch of things for us, a lot of really great artists. But no, not a lot of say in that. Not a lot of say in that happening. And really, because I was often, generally working from Keith's plots, which he drew, my focus was on that. And it reached a point, really, especially over the years, where like it became a mind meld with Keith. Like I can just flip through that plot. I know exactly what he's thinking. I know exactly, one quick look at the page, where to go with it and where to take it and where to spin it. Because we just, I think we both said either one of us could probably go off and write a Giffen DeMatteis story by ourselves, because we have that part of our brain that is melded with the other one,
Yeah, I was going to ask how your partnership has evolved over the years, but that pretty much
it's just gotten more telepathic, I think, is what it is. Yeah.
And now there's one character that I have to ask specifically about because I love him so much. You and Keith are credited with creating Gnort.
Yes, the G is silent.
Okay. All right.
Now, you're not from Nort's planet, so you don't know that. You have to be from his planet to understand that the G is silent.
Okay, so you are credited with creating Nort.
That's right.
Do you remember any of the thought process that went into creating this kind of lovable loser?
I actually do. Because a lot of things that you don't remember, because it's like whatever it is, 30 something years ago. We went out to lunch. We would show up at DC every other Friday when the checks came down. All the freelancers would descend. It was before the money. Now the money goes directly into your bank. Yeah, exactly. I would come in. I lived about 2 hours north of the city, but I would come in on a Friday and go to Marvel, go to DC, or we go to DC, we'd all hang out in Andy's office. Keith could be there. Kevin would be basically chained to Andy's desk to get the pages out. And so Keith and I went out to lunch with Andy, and somehow we got talking about, let's bring in a new Green Lantern character. And I remember Keith had an idea of like, let's do some kind. This was the '80s, remember, some kind of Sylvester Stallone. I said, no, we have Sylvester Stallone. It's Guy Gardner. We don't need that. And somehow we got in. We said, let's go off in another direction. Let's get goofy, and we started talking about the Honeymooners and Ed Norton, Art Carney's character on the Honeymooners.
Yeah.
Which is where Nort comes from. So that was the beginning of that idea. And as I began to write him, he became sort of a fusion of Ed Norton and the sort of 1970s character that Woody Allen played in his movie, that sort of nervous, goofy guy, So it would be like a Woody Allen, Art Carney voice in my head as I was writing that character. And then, of course, whatever your inspiration is, once you start to write the character, they become what they are. They take on their own identity. And Nort is one of these characters that I am in love with. I just love any chance. Whenever Keith and I would work on a project, any chance we can get Nort in here, When we did formerly known as the Justice League, let's bring in Nort. Yep. When we were writing, what was that book we were writing? Who was the orange Green Lantern?
Oh, Larfleeze.
We were writing Larfleeze.
Yep.
Can we get Norton here? And I made Norton Larfleeze cousins. It turned out that they were cousins, And so for whatever ridiculous reason, I love Nort. They actually made a Nort action figure that I have over there on my desk. And, I wrote, when I was writing for Batman the Brave and the Bold, I did an episode with Nort in there. So I got to actually bring Nort into animation, and we did the one punch bit and everything. It was great.
Nice. Oh, that's great. Now, when you came back to these characters in formerly known as the Justice League, the characters in the regular continuity were kind of getting torn apart.
Yeah, that sort of happened just toward the end of that. Yeah. And we didn't know anything about it until the end. really, because we're getting back together. We're having fun. Formerly known as the Justice League was a big hit. It won us the Eisner Award. It was great.
Yeah.
And then we did I Can't Believe It's Not the Justice League. And I remember through the dialogue, I had inserted this new plot line where Ralph thought that Sue was pregnant. And at the end, it was going to turn out that she was pregnant. She was saying, no, I'm not pregnant. I'm not pregnant. And by the end, it's like, oh my God, I'm pregnant. And I remember the editor called me up saying, well, we can't do that. We can't do it. Why? I can't tell you, but we can't do it. Because they were developing that whole crazy storyline, whatever.
Identity crisis, yeah.
Identity crisis, yeah. So we didn't really know about that. And then in our minds, I think that's the moment when our books started to exist in their own separate universe, separate from the mainstream DC universe. So years later, when Keith and I were doing Justice League 3000 and 3001, we brought in Beetle, we brought in Booster, Fire, Ice, might have even brought maybe even some other of our JLI characters. And to us, that was the continuation. All that other stuff that you read about that those other guys didn't happen. Mm-hmm. This is our little universe, and we're in charge of it. So the other versions of those characters are interesting, but that has nothing to do with what we did. Of course, this is just in my own head, to create the stories.
Yeah. Did you ever feel like? Did you ever want to comment in the story on what was happening to them in the main books? Brian Cronin refers to those as meta messages.
No, but I think that maybe we had heard about it by the time Kevin was drawing the last issue. And I think the last panel of the last issue, there was some sort of commentary through the art about it. I don't remember whether it was Beetle or Booster. We might have even, someone found a joke from one of the earlier issues of Justice League where it's like, oh, we better get home before Max shoots me. It was like, but it's because I really didn't know about it. So I wasn't commenting on it. But Kevin, I remember, did something with the artwork. I think the fact that he ended on Beetle and Booster was his way of saying, these are our guys. It has nothing to do with that thing over there. But you'd have to ask Kevin because I don't remember very clearly.
Okay. So
I have about 15 more minutes.
Okay. We're getting near the end here.
Yeah, it's the problem, when you begin at the beginning of my career, and I've still got stuff going on now. If you go chronologically, an hour and a half is going to get you through the first 15 years of my career or whatever,
So as long as the career as you've had, you haven't just worked for the big two. You had a Batazad at CrossGen, and again after when Disney purchased it, then Augusta Wind at IDW, Hero Squared, Planetary Bridge.
Planetary Brigade, yeah. I've done a lot of creator-owned stuff. Brooklyn Dreams, Girl in the Bay, on and on and on.
Autocorrect changed Brigade to Bridge.
Planetary Bridge is a whole other series, yeah.
Yeah, apparently. But among all those fantasy and superhero books, you also made one called Brooklyn Dreams. And I love autobiographical and semi-autobiographical books. So how much of John Mark DeMatteis is in Vincent Carl Santini?
Probably 100%. Brooklyn Dreams grew out of Moonshadow, actually, because when I was writing Moonshadow, I do these little flashback sequences. Moonshadow's mother was from Brooklyn. She was this hippie chick from Brooklyn, and we would periodically have these little, what I call the Brooklyn flashbacks about her childhood, about this, about that. And I thought, wouldn't it be fun to really just do something and dive into my childhood and my growing up and my coming of age and just write about that, not through the lens of fantasy, but through the lens, just through the lens of reality.
Yeah.
Although I'm a big fan of stories and writers that can look at so-called real life and push so deep into that soil that you come out and real life becomes fantastic, if you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. One of my favorite Bradbury books is Dandelion Wine. It's not a fantasy, but it's the world seen with eyes of wonder, So you see the miracles in the so-called real world right here. And that's kind of what I wanted to do with Brooklyn Dreams. Originally, we talked about doing it at Epic back then, and then I put it away for like 10 years, as often happens. And I did it. DC was launching something called Piranha Press, which was the foregoer of, is there a foregoer? Is that a word? I guess it was. If it's not, it's a word now.
There you go.
It evolved into Paradox Press that Andy Helfer took over, but it was run by a guy named Mark Nevelo initially. And I pitched him the idea, and he really, really liked it. And he's the one that came to me with Glenn Barr's artwork. Now, I had a vision in my head of what I wanted this book to look like, and this rarely happens. And I remember he opened this drawer in his office and pulled out this artwork, and it was exactly what I had in my head. I mean, that never happens. It was like, wow, yeah. This is it. This is exactly what I've been seeing in my head. And Glenn and I, another incredible collaboration. And not that we knew each other well or anything. It's just magic happened on the page. And the biggest compliment I think I ever got about Brooklyn Dreams was a writer friend who said, I always thought that the best comics could only be made by a writer artist, one person with one vision. And you guys created something that felt like the work of a writer artist, like there was just one vision. And that's kind of what it was like. Glenn always gave me exactly what I was looking for or something better. It was a wonderful collaboration. And to get to tell these stories of my coming of age, a lot of these were stories I'd been telling my friends for years, this happened.
Yeah.
But so on the one hand, it was the easiest thing I ever wrote. On the other, it was the most terrifying thing I ever wrote because I'm sort of naked on the tight wire. This is just me. Now, I changed the names for one reason and one reason alone, partly to protect the innocent, as they used to say on TV. We changed the names to protect the innocent. But also, if I make it literally me, then I'm worrying about every little historical detail having to be exactly right. But the theme of Brooklyn Dreams is memory. What we remember, how we remember, and we may remember it as Tuesday at 3:00 when it was the month before it, Monday at 3:30. I wanted to be liberated from that and not worry about every detail of the story, but the essence of my experiences in that story. So I created my alter ego in Vincent Carl Santini. But basically, everything in that book is what happened to me. That's all true. It's all true. They should put that across the cover.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your TV and animation writing.
Okay.
Obviously, a lot of those have been comic book related, and I have to ask about adapting Alan Moore's story for The Man Who Has Everything, which is one of the only adaptations to actually get his seal of approval on it.
Yeah, that's what I've heard. I hope it's true. That's what I've heard.
What was the process of adapting that classic comic into an animated episode?
Well, here's the great thing for me is that this is the first job I did for Justice League Unlimited. And it was really the job that launched my whole. I'd done a little bit of animation before, but just kind of on the side. But this really launched a whole, career that's still ongoing. Mm-hmm. And I hadn't read that story. I wasn't aware of its reputation.
Oh,
I think if I had been aware of its reputation, I would have been really intimidated. So they sent me the book. I read it. Oh, this is a great story. And, we worked out between me and the producing team how the adaptation would go. And I still remember I turned in, usually when you're working in TV, you're doing multiple drafts of a script. It's usually 3 drafts and a polish. So I turned in my draft. And my friend Stan Berkowitz, who I'd worked with on the live action Superboy show, he was the guy that brought me over to Justice League Unlimited because he had moved into animation. Mm-hmm. And I turn in my draft and time goes by and I don't hear anything. And more time goes by and I don't hear it. And I think, well, I must have screwed that one up royally. And finally I called Stan up. I said, Stan, so I haven't heard anything. Did I really screw this thing up? He said, no. It was perfect. We don't need any other drafts. You did a great job. And they immediately gave me another one and I was off, but that happens so rarely, even when you're doing a good job, there's usually always notes. There's always the next draft. And this is one of those rare occasions when that was it. It was something similar happened when I was working on the Constantine movie, Constantine City of Demons. Mm-hmm. And I think I turned in the first draft. And again, there's usually 3 drafts and a polish. And I probably got some notes. I did a second draft and I was working with people, animation people from the WB, because, it was a whole, there were probably like 10 or 12 people on the other end of the phone, all with ideas and notes. And I turned in the second draft and it was like, all right, we have no notes. It's great. Goodbye. But that stuff, that happens once in a blue moon. You're usually, working your butt off writing draft after draft of these things to get it just right. But that's what I remember about For the Man Who Has Everything was just that, no, it's great. You don't have to do any more drafts. So of course you go into the next script and you think, I'll do the same thing. And you turn that in, it's like, all right, here's 5 pages of notes for you,
Yeah. So what are the differences between writing a comic book script, writing an animated episode, and writing a live action TV episode?
I would put the live action TV and animation in a very similar thing. I guess the bridge is that, since the animation is it's being drawn, it's a visual medium that's being drawn. So it's similar to comics in that way. But the big difference, the similarities. Story is story. Character is character. There are certain basics that make a great story, whether it's in prose, whether it's a comic book, whether it's a movie, a TV show, whatever it is. There are different formats for expressing that story. Writing the format of a TV script is very different than writing a comic book script. Mm-hmm. But a good story is a good story. And that's what you're aiming for. Something with good characters that have a good arc, something memorable and emotional with a little psychological heft. And, the differences are, if I get hired on Justice League Unlimited, let's use that as the example, they have a staff, and those guys that work at Warner Bros., the Alan Burnett's and the and Jim
Paul
Krieg
Dini's
and Paul Dini's and Bruce Timm and Stan Berkowitz. I was working with Dwayne McDuffie on Justice League.
Yeah.
These guys are just great storytellers, great writers. They're not executives; they're writers. They're creative people, and they have worked out. Say they've worked out their year. They know what's happening on that show. I'm not. If I'm hired to write Spider-Man, I get to go off and do my thing with Spider-Man. And here's my vision of how this is going to go. And yeah, there's you get your feedback from your editor, but there's freedom. We talked about Craven's Last Hunt. What was in my head was what was on the page.
Yeah.
When you get hired for a TV show, you're essentially hired to execute their vision. So the challenge is, okay, there are certain things they have to meet in this episode because it might tie into this next episode, and they want, so. The challenge is to give them what they want and simultaneously bring as much of yourself to the table as you can to inject as much of your own personal stuff into it as possible. Because you don't just want to be a robot regurgitating what they're giving you. You want to give them what they want and then bring something unique to the table that's yours. And that's the challenge, I think, in writing for TV.
Yeah. So I wanted to touch on your music. You released an album called How Many Lifetimes in the 1990s.
Mm-hmm.
How long had you been working on that, and what made it the right time to put that out when you did?
Well, I had been playing music. I think I took guitar lessons in the 5th grade, so music was always a big part of my life. I played in bands for years. I'm a songwriter. I'm a singer. At a certain point, the last big band I was in broke up right around the time when my writing career took off. And so I sort of took that creative energy and put that into my writing career. But I was still writing songs, and still playing music. And I just wanted to get some of these songs out there. And a lot of these songs relate to my own spiritual search and my spiritual path and my spiritual tradition. And so it meant a lot to me to get them out there. But I wanted to do it right. So it took time for the right elements to come together, the right musicians, the right people that were my co-producers on the album, And it was one of the single most joyful creative experiences of my life. I did it over the course of 2 years because I had a writing career and a family, and then I did it with these musician friends in Chicago. So every X number of months, I'd fly out to Chicago. We'd spend a couple of weeks. Let's do the basic tracks for these next 2 weeks. Let's do the overdubs for 2 weeks. Let's do some more overdubs now. Let's do mixing for 2 weeks. And it was spread out over the course of maybe a year and a half, 2 years. Mm-hmm. But you can find this music on Spotify, Apple Music, and it's out there anywhere. And I'm still very, very proud of it. And in the 20 plus years since, I've amassed another giant stack of songs, and I keep saying I have to go back into the studio and record. I have like 4 albums mapped out. You know what I mean? So if I go back in, I have to at least do a double album to get 20 songs out, or 20 songs out there at least. But music is a really, really important part of who I am and my creative self. So I say in some ways, even when I write, I'm writing as a musician. I'm looking for the rhythm, for the melody, for, you know what I mean, in the stories. So yeah, if anyone would like to check that out, it's like I said, it's on Spotify, Apple Music, all those services, and it's called How Many Lifetimes.
Yeah, I found it on YouTube.
Also, yeah, yep. They're all on YouTube as well.
And on the album cover, we see the back of someone's head in front of the Taj Mahal.
Yeah, that's me.
Is that you? Okay.
That's me. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
What was that trip like?
I've been to India like 8 times.
Oh, wow.
Over the years. It's been a while, but I would love to go back. But over the course of time, I've been there about 8 times. Again, this relates to my own spiritual path and my spiritual tradition with an Indian spiritual master named Meher Baba. It's his birthday today. Happy birthday, Baba. And so, yeah, I've gone to India and gone to his ashram there where his tomb shrine is. And it's been some of the most extraordinary experiences of my life. And also that particular trip where that picture was taken was the first time I took my wife before she was my wife. And she said, I'm not going to India without seeing the Taj Mahal. So we flew up to Delhi and we went to the Taj Mahal. Extraordinary experience to be there. And that's where that picture was taken. You got to see the Taj Mahal at sunset and sunrise. And what an amazing, beautiful thing that was.
Oh, wow. I can only imagine. I would like to take more trips, but the flesh is willing, but the wallet is weak.
And for me, it's like, I love to travel. And, before COVID, we were going to a lot of international conventions. It's a great thing. Me and my wife, they'll pay for us to come to Italy, to Greece, to Mexico, to wherever. get to see the world. And since COVID, we have gone nowhere, absolutely nowhere, and it's a little frustrating, but I'm not ready to do it. I'm just not ready.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. I completely understand.
Yeah.
Now, before we go, I do want to talk about your latest work, the Multiverse, which you funded through Kickstarter.
Yes.
Was there a reason you went through that process rather than the usual solicitation route?
Well, as we talked about, I've done tons of creator-owned work over the years, and I toyed with the idea of doing a Kickstarter for quite some time because in my mind, so you do a creator-owned series, you go through a publisher, then you get to the audience, and this is like the wall between creator and audience is gone. Your audience is your publisher in a lot of ways. Do you know what I mean? So that was fascinating to me. And the reason I never did it was because I'm too lazy. It's like a lot of work to run, to do the creative work is one thing, but then to run the Kickstarter and do all of that is a huge amount of work. And I just didn't have it in me to do it on my own. So long story short, I have a friend named David Baldy. I met him. He took my writing workshop. My first time I did it online. He's a writer producer for TV, 20 years experience in TV. Anyway, we became friends. We got to talking about Kickstarters. And he said, well, I'd love to, run a Kickstarter with you or for you. And do you have any ideas? What idea? Do you have any ideas? I always have 100 ideas floating around. And so I pitched him four things. And the original thing was, well, we're going to do one of them and see it through and do all 5 issues through the Kickstarter. He said, why don't we do all 4? And we'll do 4 number ones, 4 first issues. And I thought, to get these 4 ideas that I've been nursing, some of them for 10 or 12 years, out into the world at once, what a really cool idea.
Yeah. So
David created this imprint, Spellbound Comics, and we found these wonderful artists, Mandrake, Matthew Dowd-Smith, Sean McManus, David Baldion, not to mention all the great artists that did our alternate covers, and, from Liam Sharp to J.H. Williams, Kevin McGuire, on and on. Just an amazing group of people signed on. And it was quite an experience. Because even though I'm doing it with David, it's a lot of work because for those 30 days, forget the prep, forget the creative work and the prep beforehand. Once that thing goes live, you have to be on social media banging the gong constantly because I could go on Twitter and say, come support our quick Kickstarter at 1:00. By 1:15, all the people that were there at 1:00 are gone. And there's like 5,000, 10,000, 30,000 other people on then, not to mention at 2:00 or 10:00 at night, so David and I and the artists really, really worked it. David was the best creative partner I could ask for. He's got a great business mind, but he's a writer. So I really trusted his feedback creatively and in terms of the business of running this thing. And incredibly, one of the most gratifying creative experiences I've had in my whole career. The books are all done. They're at the printer, because I heard about a lot of these Kickstarters, people support them. And it's like, well, it's been 42 years. I haven't gotten my book yet,
Yeah.
And so all these books are going to be in everybody's hands probably at the end of March, early April. It depends how long the printing takes, but they've been proofed. I actually have physical proofs of the books, and they're all being printed, so they're coming your way soon. And then the plan is everyone who supported all 4 books or bought the collected edition with all 4 books gets to vote on which of the 4 will continue first, because I want to continue them all.
Yeah.
But we can't do them all at once because David would go broke. So we'll get that vote after everybody gets their books. And then probably in the fall, we'll do another Kickstarter to finish off the first series as a 5-issue series and hopefully continue from there and get all these books out there and done.
Sounds great. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Now, other than you, of course, is there anything that actually ties them together? Is there a multiverse?
It's not in the sense of like the Marvel universe or the DC universe. What shares them together is they live in the universe in my head. Okay. Now, if they're all hugely successful and 5 years from now, I come up with a great idea to have all these characters meet each other somehow, that would be a lot of fun. But that's not what drives me. What drives me is telling these stories because these are all stories that really matter to me. And the fun of it also is that in the last week, we slipped in a 5th book as a bonus.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that one.
Yeah. And so I hope everybody really, really enjoys them. And the other thing is that I'm also free. We can take these books. I can go to Image or here or there with these books and maybe, finish one of them off that way and, do some of them through Spellbound. David and I are partners no matter what I do with it. And so it's been a very exciting endeavor, and it's been really satisfying creatively. And the collaborations with these artists have just been phenomenal. It was a great experience. And I say was when I got the proofs of the books, you're so involved in the creative process, and then you get involved in the Kickstarter, you forget you're actually going to have a book in your hand when it's done. It's like, I remember when my wife was pregnant, it's like you're so into the pregnancy, you're shocked when there's a baby at the end of it. It's like, oh, that's right. That's what this whole thing was about. This is baby. It's kind of the same thing. Oh, there's a book. That's right. It wasn't just about raising money on the Kickstarter. It was about actually getting these books out into the world, into people's hands. So it's very exciting.
Yeah. Well, speaking of which, as we're recording this, they haven't come out yet, and it's too late for people to join the Kickstarter. But
good. I'm glad you mentioned that. Thank you. If you go to spellboundcomics.com, you can still purchase, because David has an overprinting. You can purchase any of the books, or you can purchase the collected edition. For the collected edition, I wrote intros for all the stories. Tom DeFalco wrote a foreword. There's development art. There's scripts. It's a really beautiful package. Really beautiful package. So very, very, very exciting. Yeah, so that should be in people's hands soon. And let me see. Well, since we're going to be going, I should plug anything and everything that's out right now.
Yes, please do.
Spider-Man: The Lost Hunt. Speaking of Craven.
Yep.
Which is a new story that, among other things, dives into elements of Craven's origin that we never knew before. So I always thought there was this weird gap. Here's this Russian, immigrant family, comes to the United States, broken, poor, and somehow, how does this guy become Craven the Hunter? And so through the vehicle of Gregor, who was one of Craven's right-hand man, and a new character that we introduced in this story, we get to learn this entire backstory about Craven that we've never learned before. And plus, it takes place during that period when Peter and Mary Jane moved to Portland. She was pregnant. Peter had no powers. So Peter is facing this incredible threat, utterly powerless, with a pregnant wife. So there's that drama going on. There's the new character. There's the Craven backstory. It's a really, really very happy with the way the books turned out. I think issue 4 just came out recently. Issue 5 will be out next month, and then it'll be collected, I guess, in a couple of months. The series I did previous to this, which is the Ben Reilly Spider-Man series, was recently collected, so that's out there. I have a novella called The Excavator, which is out, which you can get at Amazon, or you could check it out at the publisher's webpage, which is called Neotext, neotextcorp.com. Just finished another novella for them, which should be out probably in the summer, which I'm very, very excited about. So it's really been fun. It's the first prose I've done in about 10 years, so it's great to be back doing prose again, and I want to keep doing that as we move forward. And there are other things going on that are very exciting that unfortunately I can't talk about, including some new stuff from Marvel. So a lot of stuff. I'm happy when I'm busy, and I'm busy, so I'm happy.
Excellent. Well, that's great to hear.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me.
Yeah, my pleasure. My pleasure. We talked for a long time. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we've only covered this much.
Yeah. That's how it happens.
Well,
sometimes.
Maybe we'll do it again a few months down the line, and we can continue with some of the other things.
That would be great. One little note at the end here. JM mentioned that his Moonshadow collaborator, John J. Muth, has a show on Apple TV based on his works, but blanked on the name. That show is called Stillwater, and the 3rd season starts in May. If you think you or your kids would be interested in following the story of a Zen panda and his friends, check it out. Once again, I would like to sincerely thank J.M. DeMatteis for taking the time to talk with me. If there are any other comic book creators you would like to hear me talk to, let me know and I'll do what I can. Or if you're a creator yourself, feel free to reach out. I've really enjoyed the 2 interviews I've done so far, and I hope you have as well. You can send me those suggestions, or questions you'd like answered for a regular scripted episode, by emailing me at welcome2geektown, all spelled out, @gmail.com. Or you can go to the website, welcome2, the number 2 in this case, geektown.com, and click the Submit a Question link if you'd prefer to remain anonymous. Other contact options include facebook.com/welcome to Geektown, Twitter @GeektownPodcast, or Mastodon @welcome2geektown @mastodon.social. Also, if you'd like to support the show directly, why not become a patron at patreon.com/welcome to Geektown for just $1 per month. to get access to full scripts of the shows, outtakes, and a monthly shoutout. You can also help the show grow by subscribing and giving a 5-star review over on Apple Podcasts to join the Geektown City Council, which helps other people find the show so we can all tell them,
welcome to Geektown. Population, us.
Welcome to Geektown is written, narrated, edited, and produced by me, Kurt Onstead. Theme music is by Aaron Levitz, logo art by Archie Santana. All of their sound clips are the copyrighted material, their respective owners, and no infringement is intended, falling under fair use.